Hello everybody, and welcome to today's edition of Land TV Network. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel, and today we're going to be talking about activism, and particularly student activism on the campus. If we remember the 1960s, that's all you used to see on college campuses. Today, it seems like it's non-existent. And here to explain why is my guest, Deborah Montanez. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
My first question to you, because we're not the only ones that have noticed this change, if you can explain why the difference between the 1960s and today.
I will certainly hope I can. I'm currently a student here at William Patterson, and I am seeing somewhat of a trend. With myself, I'm a political science major, and usually the political science majors, they're a little bit different, but you do see a change now from the 1960s till now, and I think a lot has to do with it with the social media. Instead of using the tools that they're accessible to the college students like Facebook, Twitter, and all these things to rally with big issues going on today, like the student debt and things that should really concern students in the political process, is, they're using it for, what's new with Kim Kardashian and, what's affecting, Heath Ledger, when, he had an overdose or whatever. I mean, it's really issues that they're not pertinent to what's really happening in their lives. I mean, more recently, you're starting to see them wake up, which is, I think, a very good sign. But, I really don't think it's enough and I think that the difference between now and the 60s is that, in the 60s you had a big, problem. You had the Jim Crow laws were just starting to, leave the system because the desegregation of the schools. And, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, you had, strength in numbers. You had people going out there and knowing that you had to fight for what you believed in and what you wanted. And it's almost like racism, it's still prevalent, but it's taken like a back seat, like a place in the shadows. And it's like one of those things that you just don't really talk about, and it's a very big problem.
But let's talk about some of these issues. And you had mentioned some of the issues of the 60s, but how about some of the issues of today? Like, for example, the economy. That should be a big issue because not a lot of people are getting jobs. And when the kids graduate from here, they're graduating with, massive amount of debt, and they're not finding employment. If that was me and I was a college student to stay, my blood pressure would be going. So, isn't that enough to get the students?
I absolutely agree, and that's actually what frustrates me very much so. And I have to say that, it's funny because I always call the political process a snowball effect, and every administration inherits the other's, downfalls. And people think, oh, well, and they blame the current administration, and we'll just wave a magic wand and this is going to be what happens. And it's really not the case. If you really want to examine the economic situation right now in this country, you have to go back about 35 years during the Reagan administration. And you have to say, okay, people, and the wealthy are always complaining how, we're being taxed and, and all this stuff. But what's really happening is, and I learned this in an economics class that I'm taking actually this semester by the former secretary during the Clinton administration, Robert Reich. It's actually really funny because people almost consider him like a socialist. And people think, oh my God, capitalism. But really it's not one regime or another. It's really what works. And obviously we know socialism doesn't work, but does extreme capitalism work because of the disparity and the inequity that we're seeing? Now, what I mean by the inequity is, and what I was talking about during the Reagan administration is, he was the president that actually signed off on the wealthy, paying 35%.
Right.
When they were used to, during the Carter administration, at least 70%, and prior to that, 90%. And that's why I said you have to go back 35 years, because it's not something that just developed overnight. The deficit is $18 trillion and growing. And with the new Affordable Care Act, it's estimated to grow about $52 billion because the money has to come from somewhere. So now touching on student debt, you're going to say the student debt right now currently is $58 billion. So the money has to come from somewhere because you have to make up the difference in the economy. Now, in the 80s and the 90s, you're saying to yourself, everybody was told, okay, if you want to get a great job, you have to go to school. Now people are going to school and they have this debt and there's no jobs because everything has gone overseas. Thanks to the Free Commerce Act, also a Reagan ideal. This is just, and it's got nothing to do with party. It's got nothing to do with Republican or Democrat because the Democrats are big on social programs and that increases government spending. So
and that increases the taxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to use the student debt to essentially satisfy the deficit. So I have no problem with incurring student debt, and I'm sure that the average student has no problem either, as long as they're not getting a job at McDonald's after they've educated themselves.
Right. So let's go back a minute. Do the students not fully understand what the issues are? Maybe that's not it until they actually get out of college. I think that they really don't understand. I think another thing is frustration with the political process because of the way that it's designed. In order basically to, the checks and balances system. The politician spends 1 year, running and another year campaigning and then another year trying to fix it, and then it's just this cycle. So, essentially, what I think is a problem is that I really don't think that they are aware. And they just say, I speak to a lot of them, and the best part is the common response is, well, I don't really care about politics. And you really should, because everything you do on a daily basis is a political decision. Your shoes, your clothes, which are commodities, your gasoline prices, which is the pump, what you pay at the pump. So when you say essentially that you don't care about politics, I hate to quote Bertolt, but he said that is the biggest ignorance, is the political ignorance. So is it that they're complacent?
I really
and they
do believe.
don't know how, they don't understand that they have power.
They absolutely have power, because...
I know, you and I say that, but they themselves might not understand that they have the power.
No, absolutely.
To do
I
something.
agree. I think that a lot does have to do with the fact that they don't realize how much power they have. But I also believe that the problem is that they focus on individualism rather than collectivism. Meaning, yes, there's not strength in one voice, but if one voice talks to another and another, now you have a community that feels the same way, that feels the same frustration, and that can actually participate in the political process. Because I promise you, if every college campus in, let's just say, New Jersey, if you had, let's say the population in each college campus was 200,000. I don't know what the number is, but let's say you had 50,000 people in every college campus, private or public, and you had 50,000 students in each, and let's say there was 20, or let's say there was 10. Now you're talking about 500,000 people. So you're talking 500,000 people out there, going out there to vote and speaking their voice and making themselves heard.
Then you have the numbers.
There's strength in numbers. But if everybody just says, oh, you know what, that doesn't concern me, and that's where the problem is.
So how do we make the student understand that they have the power?
I really think that a lot of it has to do, and I know this sounds cliche, but what kind of major they choose. If you have, let's say, a communications major that doesn't really pick up like a poli-sci class here and there, then you're going to have that kind of problem. You really, or you have to at least, even if you are a communications major or you are an English major, watch CNN, watch MSNBC, watch Fox. So because I always like CNN, and I'm not promoting anybody, but I like them because they're neutral. MSNBC tends to go very left, and Fox goes very right. So you should always gather a little bit of every view so that you know every angle. And the best way to do it, believe it or not, really isn't so much the news, because when political campaigns are occurring, they each, bash each other. So that's always not the best source or the tool. The best source, and I know it's very boring, is C-SPAN. You have the Transparency Act, you have the Sunshine Act. It is their duty to film these things, to tell you, the voter, the constituent, what is going on. So you need to turn on C-SPAN once in a while to see the yays and the nays and the abstains, so that you know how these guys are, voting on your rights, essentially.
So should the education system be doing something?
They should most definitely promote it. They should most definitely promote students to find out what the resources they have available to finding out what the political process is.
And how about the parents?
That's actually a very good sociological belief. It's funny because I took a class and they said the very big trend was you receive your morality and your political views from your school, first and foremost your parents' views, your school, your peers. So depending on which way you fall is what kind of political ideologies you're going to have. So if you have, let's just say, what's going on right now with the inequity and the disparity. If you have parents that have each 2 jobs because they're middle class or shrinking middle class, because now that's really being abolished, you either have money or you don't. If you have 2 parents that are too involved with trying to provide for their family, then that's where you're going to get that kid that's being left alone, not because the parents want to, but because they're too busy working. So the kid's not going to really go into intensive discussion as to what's really happening, because the parent is killing themselves to be able to provide for them in the future to go to college or currently attend college. And then the worst part of it is just to go back, not that there's anything wrong with McDonald's. My parents have a little small business at the diner. They kill themselves. We make next to little or next to nothing. It's just that once you have a bachelor's, which is now being equivalent to a high school diploma, and believe me, I'm doing my bachelor's now, and it's no easy task. So to equate in the business and the financial sector a bachelor's degree to a high school diploma, I have to say it's something tough to swallow. So now you have people that incurred an undergrad debt and now are going into a graduate debt. So by the time everything's all said and done, they're anywhere between, without interest, $200,000 and $300,000 per person. And then tell them that they're going to get a job waiting tables. Again, nothing's wrong with that. That's very frustrating, and I absolutely think that it should be addressed by the young person.
So now, after the 60s, let's go through the time era, came the 70s and 80s, which is more or less my generation. I graduated here.
You're a William
I'm not telling anybody what.
It's okay. I was like maybe 20
apathy was big, and it started. My parents weren't. They were politically involved, yes, but not as much as the 60s.
Yeah, of course.
So
don't not to interrupt you. The 60s, even though it was activism, in order to be able to attain a goal, don't forget you got to shed a little blood. So the 60s, as much as a lot of progress came about, it was a pretty bloody revolution. Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated, JFK was assassinated. So with activism comes fear. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were saying your parents.
What happened let's go back to that. Is in the 1960s, a lot of them, if they weren't out doing activism on college campuses, they were being active in a different way. Maybe they decided to lobby a legislator in some way.
Absolutely.
Become active in that way. But then my generation came along, and my mom and dad they're political, but not
as involved.
Right, and that trickles down to the
younger generation.
Yes. So therefore, we weren't as active as the 60s, and and I've talked to even the older people, or in people my generation, they don't know how to organize. And so unless you develop that skill, your offspring isn't going to organize either, unless the parent has the skill to do it and they see what the parent's involved in.
Like I said, yeah, I agree, because definitely, parents definitely mold, obviously, their children.
Yeah.
Now, why I said the 60s comment is because, like I said, with great freedom comes great sacrifice. That sounds a little bit cliche, but I think it's applicable here. Because yes, in the 60s you saw a lot of turnaround, but you also saw a lot of violence, a lot of bloodshed. So people just want to say, oh my gosh, I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to that. But unfortunately, the less you participate in what's going on, the more it's going to happen. So
That's right.
the more you turn the blind eye to it, the easier it becomes for these yahoos in office to get away with what they're getting away with. So you have to be
The
active.
millennials or the yahoos, right?
No, I meant the
Right.
politicians, And like I said, it's got nothing to do with party. I really do feel that sometimes, a politician, you can't hold one responsible for all. But I really feel that if there was a stronger voice, you would definitely see a better turnout. And it's not a thing. I don't think it's a question of not knowing how to rally, because again, Facebook, Twitter, all these things, because you saw that in Occupy Wall Street. What you have to understand is the minute that you start to rally, you start to organize. Because yes, granted, you had the vagrants in Occupy Wall Street that were just using it as an opportunity to, it just, everybody kind of lost touch of what was really being fought for. Because essentially it is, a Wall Street problem. We have a lot of tax cuts for the wealthy. You have ways that, they're being able to get around paying their corporate share, between having, corporate tax havens and having their headquarters in like Barbados, where it's much more friendly, and then having 2 meetings a year there so that they don't have to pay the U.S., amount. Or, and then, like I said, I'm only using those examples because Occupy Wall Street started off very well, and then it just dwindled, and people lost sight of it. But what ended up happening, and why I'm using that, or even Baltimore when the young man was killed, it turned almost into a partial race war, and what happened? The National Guard was brought in. I mean, the state was put in a state of emergency. So people I feel are essentially afraid. I mean, listen, I would be afraid.
They're afraid because they're being put down.
Because it's a very gray fine line between authoritative military police power. Because once you start rallying, because that's the only thing really people listen to. That's the only thing they react to. So once they start really organizing, you do a peaceful protest, guess what's going to happen? They'll look out their window and they'll say, oh, you know what, they're exercising their freedom of speech. But you really start to be frustrated and get upset, and now you're going to get some attention. And what ends up happening? Police power is used
to
subdue you, to repress the population.
And that's the same thing that happens to the college campuses. So what about the idea of, okay, you have an idea, and maybe not organizing visibly like that, but do another thing like infiltrating?
You mean infiltrating?
Like if you have an idea, okay, like for example, my pet peeve is the national debt, okay? My blood pressure is boiling over this because we're passing this upon to you guys.
Oh yeah. I really feel that, unfortunately, I think the national debt, no matter how you look at it, it's never really going to be, let's just say ideologically, at 10 trillion. I don't say never, because I mean you did see it real close during the Clinton administration, but I want to say it's not gonna be an easy task, is what I should say, because unfortunately when the New Deal occurred with FDR, and or when we started Social Security, we started essentially that program in debt, because the first people that collected it never paid into it. So now you're just going to have a rollover. So basically, my generation is paying for my mother's generation, because she's a baby boomer, because they're starting to pension out and retire.
Yeah, like for example, maybe the Federal Reserve has something to do with this.
Well, the Federal Reserve is definitely independent, which is, quasi-independent, and that's actually, I think, a good thing. I mean, everything has its pros and its cons. The Federal Reserve it's good because it's one less thing that you have to worry about in the political process. But at the same time, right now, and this always irks me. Right now, they're talking about raising interest rates, and because they think that it's going to it's going to do better for inflation, and that's a problem, because what they're basing it on is because of unemployment numbers, and they're saying unemployment is down to 5.1, 5.2%. And it is low, but what they're not discussing, and what no politician discusses, and I'm a fan of the Obama administration, but the Obama administration included, I'm not a fan of everything, like any, politician, but, like I'm not a fan of the Affordable Care Act. But
Are the students that you have found, are they in favor of the Affordable Care Act?
It all depends. That's a great question. It all depends on where they come socioeconomically. If their parents if they are the product of welfare or social programs, they're in favor. Because Medicaid was expanded almost 400%. You saw a lot of changes within Medicaid. I'm sorry, Medicaid was expanded, not Medicare. Medicare was cut. Now, that was a great idea. But here's the thing. I was making last income tax return. It's okay. It's not a problem. I was making a little under 40 grand. And when I tried getting a quote, it was astronomical. I barely made it with 2 jobs, making almost $40,000. And that's not considered poverty. So my quote was ridiculous. I couldn't afford it. And now that I haven't been able to find a job, which is fine, I have no problem talking about it. I'm a very open person. I try and maintain humility. Now that I haven't had a job, I'm eligible for Medicaid. It's amazing. It's almost like you're being rewarded for not producing, for not putting into the system. And that's actually a very big problem, because let's just say what's being about, I don't remember the specific number, so I don't want to be quoted. I think it's about 4 million Americans would return to the workforce if they knew that their Medicaid benefits were not going to be cut. It's amazing, because they'll actually weigh out, well, I could make $7,000 more at my job, or I could not do it because if I do, then my Medicaid's going to be taken away. And it's almost like you're being punished. And that's what I was talking about, the shrinking middle class. You either have money or you don't. That's it.
So do the students understand that, for example, with the Affordable Health Care Act, the money to fund that bill has come from somewhere? Do they see the economics?
See, that's the thing. That's what I think.
Okay.
I think that's a big problem. If you're talking to an economics major, yeah, they do. But if you're talking to, let's say, an English Lit major or a communications major, probably not. And
so okay, because in some ways it was sold that it's going to be free.
Yeah.
But we know nothing is ever free.
Absolutely not.
So you might get a youngster who
doesn't really know.
Yeah.
I always love it, because people think, I love when people say Obamacare. I love it. People don't realize, and I'm going to quote my professor, John Mason, and he always says, people think that it's a socialist idea. It's actually a neoliberal, the Affordable Care Act is a neoliberal belief, because it's not free. It's not. You had to do Medicare cuts. You had to do extensive Medicare cuts. I think they cut Medicare by about $5 billion, essentially, to be able to roll out the package. And what better place to take from than Medicare, because each individual that is working, that is producing into the system with their taxes, you see the little portion on your paycheck stub that says Medicare. I think depending obviously on how much you get paid, I think it's $18, $25. And I'm basing it on my old W-2. My own, I should say, paychecks, not W-2s. And in what better place? It's constantly being replenished. It's constantly receiving an influx. And you're cutting it. And the best part is no politician will ever touch Medicare or Social Security, because what happens? The older generation are the ones that watch C-SPAN, are the ones that vote. They're the ones that are actively watching. Because let's just face it, I hate to say it, they're retiring. What else are they going to do? But read the paper and see what's going on and see what's going to affect them. So let's attack the younger generation that's not paying attention.
That's right, and that's what we see. And I've also noticed the same thing when we talk about education. and for example, the students here the other day were talking about free education, and I said to them, well, what do you mean?
Nothing's free.
Right, nothing is free, so where would you get the money to pay for this? And one of them did come out and say, for the K through 12 system, the higher education system, to get it from the taxpayers.
Now, I agree with you. See, everybody tells me I sound leftist, but at the same time, I really sound rightist as well, because free education, nothing in life is free. Nothing. You can't. I don't even think you can smile because you got to go to the dentist. If you smile, you got to go to the dentist and maintain your teeth. So, essentially, if you're getting it from the taxpayer, right? Here's the thing. All right, so you want to higher taxes on the rich. That's great. That's still not going to do anything. Eventually, everyone in the short term has to pay. In the long term, fine. You can solve it. But in the short term, the immediate reparation, it's got to come from somewhere. So, like, for example, in Europe, yes, you have free education. It's not free. They pay half their salary in taxes. They celebrate it in, like, July or August. They have, because the rest of the year, the rest of the 6 months, they're actually going to get to keep their paychecks. Because it's going towards healthcare, it's going towards education. So nothing is free. And you're going to pay one way or another. So, they talk about free education. And I'm not saying that, for example, state colleges like Berkeley, like William Patterson, because they were free. They were free at one point or very minimal cost. Like when Elizabeth Warren talks and she says, when I went to Berkeley, I believe she went to Berkeley, don't quote me, but I know Robert Reich did for sure. He teaches there currently, I believe. And they talk about when they went, and how it was free or next to free. And it's very interesting to me because, yes, you want this to be free, but nobody wants to pay. And that's what makes me sound like a Republican, because nobody wants to pay. And I'm not talking about just the rich, I'm talking about, the poor, the middle class. You talk about, as a politician, you talk about raising taxes, I promise you, that will be the end of your career. Everyone has to talk about cutting taxes. But you can't cut taxes and increase government spending, because then you're going to have this problem.
Right, and you said it. If you talk about, you talk about raising the money. You're right. It's the end of the politician's career.
That's it. You're done. You talk about increasing taxes. You're done. Just don't even think about it. There was a guy, I think he ran against Nixon. I don't remember. It was always an ongoing joke in one of my old classes when I went to Bergen. So this was years ago. And he said that I don't remember who he ran against, and I don't remember the guy's name. I'm going to look it up because it's going to drive me nuts. But it was really funny because he actually said, this guy he had a great plan, and he said great things. But once he said that taxes needed to be raised, that was it. That was the end of the shebang for him. So nobody's going to do it. I mean, and they will do it, but they'll lie to you while they're campaigning because they just want to get in there.
That's right, and the people fall for that. You got it. And Deb, you know what? We are out of time.
We are. My goodness, that went quickly. Thank you so much for having me.
And you're welcome. And you're welcome back anytime. And folks, thank you for watching another edition of Land TV Network. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel. For more information on the show, please go to studentsforabetterfuture.com. That's studentsforabetterfuture.com. Thank you very much.